Man, it is good to be back. Hello and welcome to IU Sports Sunday here on WGCL. Nick Rotacap with you. Because the NFL is overseas, we've got a short show today, and we've got a lot to catch up on because I was in the Pacific Northwest at this time last week. So I did not get the chance to come on air and talk about what in the world happened in Eugene, Oregon. But of course, we've got to touch on first what happened yesterday. We had lots of rain, lots of wind. And oh, by the way, there was a football game that took place here in Bloomington. Indiana took down Michigan State very convincingly, 38-13, the final in that one, as the Hoosiers improve to 7-0 and will likely be the number 2 team in the country when all is said and done later today. Although if you ask them, rankings don't matter until the college football playoff. Fernando Mendoza, Indiana's quarterback, and I've been on this train for a while. But if you're not on the train yet, welcome aboard. Fernando Mendoza is going to be a Heisman finalist. He is going to be on a plane to New York here in just under 2 months, and he will be one of the 4 young men sitting on that stage, hoping to hear their name called and hoping to be honored as the best player in all of college football. This guy is unbelievable. Unbelievable, to say the least. I think that's being polite. Mendoza yesterday, 24 of 28 for 332 yards and 4 passing touchdowns. He did not throw an interception. He did not take a sack. He also rushed 5 times for 18 yards. His ball placement, and it's radio, so I can't describe it to you adequately enough. His ball placement is unbelievable. When you're watching him make some of these throws up the seam to Omar Cooper Jr., on a go ball to Elijah Surratt, where all Surratt had to do was get a little bit of separation from his defender and reach straight up. Mendoza led him perfectly, as he did with Cooper up the seam. On these out routes, the timing is just either the receiver catches it or nobody catches it. This guy is making throws that very few other quarterbacks can make at the college level. And I know a lot of NFL draft experts have him going first overall, top 5. I hope he doesn't get drafted by the Cleveland Browns or the New York Jets, man, because those places are where quarterbacks go to die. And I know that Mendoza's he's gonna have somebody in his ear, his agent, whomever, saying, "Dude, you're a first-round pick. You got to declare." But I hope that if his potential landing spots are Cleveland or New York, that he says no. I don't know how in the world he would say no because it's the NFL draft. But I really hope Mendoza goes to an organization that doesn't have a reputation for killing quarterbacks. Because, man, he is going to be playing on Sundays for a long time. When your touchdown total matches your incompletion total over a start, I think that's pretty good. Mendoza, 3rd nationally in completion percentage among qualified quarterbacks at 73.5. Ohio State's Julian Sayin, 1st at 80%. A lot of people thinking Sayin should win the Heisman, but I would counter by saying Mendoza can spin the rock. And he also has a better touchdown-interception ratio. Mendoza, 21 touchdowns, which is tied for 1st in the FBS, to just 2 interceptions. So he has the best touchdown-interception ratio in the country. And, oh, by the way, Mendoza, 21-2 touchdowns to picks. Julian Sayin, 19 touchdowns to 3 interceptions. Mendoza has taken 6 sacks, but it's okay. It's okay. I do want to also point out there is a new receiving touchdown leader, and his name is Elijah Surratt. 9 touchdown catches, leads the FBS. Surratt, the volume numbers in terms of receiving yardage won't jump out at you. 5 for 59. Or sorry, that was E.J. Williams, I beg your pardon. 4 for 70 and 2 touchdowns for Elijah Surratt yesterday in Indiana's convincing homecoming win over Michigan State. But again, the second touchdown catch that Elijah Surratt had, he was running, it was either a go route or kind of a fade toward the back corner of the end zone. I think it was from about 40 yards out. Mendoza launched it and dropped it straight into the bucket. And all Surratt had to do was reach up and grab it. And he did. And it was a beautiful catch because he had a defender in his face. And I would argue the catch is just as impressive as the throw. But Elijah Surratt should be in the conversation to win the Biletnikoff Award, which is, of course, given to the top receiver in all college football. Surratt leads the nation in touchdown catches. He's averaging 14 yards per reception, which is not among the nation's leaders, but still, his consistency in Big Ten games is quite notable to me because this is the second time in 4 conference games that Surratt has caught multiple touchdown passes. He's caught a touchdown pass in all 4 Big Ten games. 2 of his 4 games played in the Big Ten this year, he caught what went on to be the game-winning touchdown pass in the 4th quarter. It is clear that, for good reason, Fernando Mendoza calls on Elijah Surratt when he needs a sure big play late in a game. And Surratt delivers every single time. The guy calls himself Waffle House. He's always open. Even when it doesn't look like he's open, he's open. And again, I encourage you to watch Elijah Surratt's highlights from yesterday because I'm up there in the press box and watching this and thinking, wow, there are not many better receivers than Elijah Surratt in college football. And in that same vein, there are not many better receivers than Omar Cooper in all of college football. Cooper led all Indiana receivers yesterday. 8 catches, 115 yards, and a touchdown. His long being that 48-yard grab where he ran up the seam and had a bunch of separation. And sure, he had a bunch of separation. Michigan State's secondary is not good. I'll be the first to tell you that. But Cooper had a bunch of separation. Mendoza led him perfectly. Didn't even have to break stride. Just keep running. I'll get the ball to you. Don't worry about it. 48-yard pitch and catch for Cooper's lone touchdown. And you look at the FBS leaderboard, Surratt is at the top with 9 touchdowns. Omar Cooper tied for 5th with 7 touchdown catches. He is averaging nearly 16 yards per reception. Tied with Jeremiah Smith of Ohio State. Jeremiah Smith, I'm going to throw some numbers at you now, blindly. Well, I guess not blindly because I mentioned the touchdown totals. But people talk about Ohio State's Jeremiah Smith as a Biletnikoff winner to be as if he is automatically the best receiver in college football this year just because of what he did last year and the fact that he is one of the highest-rated recruits ever in all of college football. Jeremiah Smith's numbers this year: 49 receptions for 602 yards and 7 touchdown catches. Elijah Surratt this year: 43 receptions, 603 yards, and 9 touchdown catches. Surratt has fewer receptions, the same amount of yardage, plus or minus 1, and 2 more touchdown catches, including 2 game winners. He's better than Jeremiah Smith right now. I'm not talking about potential. I'm not talking about star power. I'm not talking about NFL future success. I'm talking about production over potential, right? What Kurt Cignetti preaches. Who's better on the field right now? And the answer is clearly Waffle House, Elijah Surratt. Indiana's receiver room. Remember when Donovan McCulley transferred out? People were thinking, oh no. Some of you might have thought, oh no. But Indiana's receiver room has a 3-headed monster right now. Omar Cooper, Elijah Surratt, and E.J. Williams. E.J. Williams, by the way, 5 for 59 and a touchdown yesterday, receiving. And he should have had a second touchdown catch, but it was taken off the board because while his toe landed inbounds, apparently his heel landed out of bounds after his toe landed inbounds. And somehow that means it wasn't a catch, even though in college football and in the NFL, you see receivers make toe drag catches all the time, where their toes are in bounds and their heels land way out of bounds. And NFL Red Zone host Scott Hansen brought that up and asked a very interesting question. How is that not a catch if toe drags are a catch? So E.J. Williams probably robbed of a second touchdown yesterday. But that's okay because Indiana still won convincingly, although I'm sure E.J. would like to have that one back. If I were in his shoes, I would as well. But Indiana, now 7-0, in line to rise one spot higher in the AP poll, which is historically significant because Indiana has never been number 2 in the AP poll. Barring the voters, I don't know, somehow jumping Georgia up there or something, I don't think that's going to happen. Unless the voters commit a supreme act of robbery, Indiana's going to be number 2, behind only Ohio State. And the computers seem to think that we are headed for an Ohio State-Indiana Big Ten championship game. You look at the ESPN Football Power Index, which is unfortunately the best analytical model that I have access to, that I understand how to decipher as well. I think that's a key. I'm not a big analytics nerd. But I know what the computers tell me generally bears itself out. Indiana drops from number 2 to number 4 in the ESPN FPI because Oregon throttled Rutgers yesterday. I think it was 56-10, which you consider Oregon going across the country, traveling east where teams don't historically do well. That is impressive. But gee, Oregon above Indiana in the Football Power Index. I wish the model would account for head-to-head, because Indiana should not be below a team that they beat on the road in the FPI. But that's something that I cannot fix. What I can tell you is that Indiana is 4th in the FPI. Their projected win-loss is 11.8 to 1.1, which means you're looking at 12-0 in the regular season and losing the Big Ten championship game, most likely. The Hoosiers have a 33% chance to win the Big Ten, which is second only to Ohio State. Ohio State is at 54.4% per ESPN's FPI. Indiana has a 93.9% chance to make the CFP, which is second only to Ohio State, a 28% chance to make the national championship, and a 14.5% chance to win the national championship. All of those numbers also second only to the Ohio State Buckeyes. So right now, we are on a collision course to have Indiana and Ohio State face off at Lucas Oil Stadium on the first Saturday in December to decide the Big Ten champion. What also is taking place on the first Saturday in December is Indiana versus Louisville men's basketball at Gainbridge Fieldhouse. I believe that game tips at 1 o'clock. The Big Ten championship kicks at 8, if memory serves. Tell you what, it could be a fun, albeit expensive day for Indiana Hoosiers fans in the Circle City on December 6th. Excuse me. But man, what timeline do we live in where the Big Ten title contenders include Indiana as not just an outside shot like they were last year? Had they beaten Ohio State, they probably would have played in the Big Ten championship game. What world do we live in where Indiana is one of the favorites to make the Big Ten title game in football? This is why they extended Curt Cignetti. This is why Sig got paid. Third highest paid coach in all of college football this year. New contract, $11.6 million. He's going to retire a Hoosier. He said it himself. Sorry, Penn State, you're going to have to look somewhere else. And I would not look at Matt Rule. The crockpot is souring by the game. Nebraska made a quick exit from the AP Top 25, losing at PJ Flex, Minnesota. Ski you ma, row the boat, go Gophers. But here in Bloomington, Indiana probably upset that they don't play either Nebraska or Minnesota this year. There are some things, though, for the Hoosiers to iron out. I know they're 7-0, they're going to be number 2, and you're thinking, oh, life is good. But I think that we have found what is going to dictate the ceiling of this team moving forward. We got an action-packed show here on IU Sports Sunday. We'll tell you all about what that thing is right after this here on WGCL. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotocap with you, talking about the ceiling for Indiana football this year and what is going to dictate it. Might sound a little bit out there, but I'm going to say the defense dictates Indiana's ceiling, and I'll tell you why. Indiana winning convincingly yesterday, holding Michigan State to just 3 second-half points, all of which came in garbage time on a field goal that probably shouldn't have been kicked. Only giving up 13 points as a whole, you might think, okay, that's pretty good. My counterpoint would be that there were a lot of chunk plays that Michigan State and quarterback Aiden Childs were able to rip off. The Spartans had 8 passing plays of 15 yards or more and 2 rushes of 10 yards or more, the big sore thumb being the 64-yard rush that Childs had in the second half. The longest rush of his career by far. His previous long, I think, was 28. There were a lot of 3rd and 4th and longs that Michigan State converted on. The Spartans unsuccessful on 4 fourth-down conversions last week against UCLA. By the way, we'll talk about UCLA because they're raising some eyebrows as well. Michigan State 3 of 4 on fourth down yesterday. Jonathan Smith, very aggressive, as I would be if I was in his shoes as well. And he paid off 3 of 4 times he tried it. A lot of defenders leaving open space underneath. That's what I saw in the press box. And rewatching the game, I might see something different. But what I saw was Aiden Childs picking apart Indiana's soft zone coverage. That's what I saw. That doesn't mean that's what it was, but that's what it looked like to me. Childs had time because he is a very talented dual-threat quarterback. We saw that with his 64-yard run, among others. He had time, and when he could extend plays and escape the pocket, more often than not, good things happened for Michigan State. It didn't always lead to points, but good things happened on a consistent basis when he was able to keep plays alive after they broke down. A lot of people also thought that Michigan State was getting away with holds play after play after play, and it did look like there were at least a couple holding penalties that were not called against Michigan State that should have been. But my concern moving forward is not with the offense, it's with the defense, because the injuries are also starting to become a concern. Mikhail Kamara was dealing with a shoulder issue yesterday, and he has a history of shoulder issues. And Kellen Wyatt was banged up for the second game running. Remember, he was down early against Oregon, and he was also, I think, rolled up on late in yesterday's game, walked off, but he was being helped by trainers. And those are both of Indiana's star edge rushers, Kamara and Wyatt, a big part of why the interior D-line has been so successful is because of the guys on the edges taking attention away from the guys on the inside, making offensive lives miserable. So my concern would be Indiana's defense got off to a slow start yesterday. A very slow start. Michigan State led 10-7. And they were holding the ball for a really, really long time on those possessions. You look at Michigan State's first 2 drives, the field goal and then the touchdown to take a 10-7 lead. 6:53 and 8:18. So 2 possessions of at least 6.5 minutes to start the game. Indiana only had 2 drives in the first half. Both of those were touchdowns. But Indiana only had 2 offensive possessions in the first half. It was clear that Michigan State's plan was to hold on to the ball for as long as possible and limit the amount of time Indiana's offense spent on the field while keeping the defense on the field for as long as possible. Kind of like what Northwestern tried to do against Oregon. And early on it worked. And Curt Cignetti said after the game that when the defense puts the tape on tomorrow, as in today, Sunday, there will be some things early in the game that they're not pleased with. But he said he thought late in the second quarter and in the second half, they buckled down. You can get away with a slow start against a team like Michigan State where the defense is more akin to Swiss cheese than anything else. But I don't know that you can get away with that slow start against a better team, against a more complete team. We're going to play the hypothetical game for a second, and I know if I had wheels and pedals, I'd be a bicycle. But I would pose the question of if Indiana's defense had started that slowly, giving up these big 3rd and 4th down conversions, giving up chunk plays when Michigan State is behind the chains, like they did against Michigan State early yesterday, if Indiana had started like that against Oregon, I don't think they would have won. And it's not exactly rocket science, but Indiana's defense was a huge reason why they won against Oregon. Dante Moore could do nothing in the second half of that game because of how good Indiana's defense was. And also, Indiana's defense was good throughout the game, not just in the second half. But I would counter by saying if the defense is going to have a slow start like that, it's good that it happened against Michigan State and not, say, for example, against UCLA. Because I'll tell you what, UCLA got better after firing Deshaun Foster. And it's not even close. The Bruins yesterday won again. They beat Maryland on a late field goal. 3 late scoring drives from Nico Iamaleava. UCLA, winners of 3 in a row, going back to that upset win over the now lowly Penn State Nittany Lions. Penn State and Michigan State have the same record, 3-4, 0-4 in the Big Ten. If you had that on your bingo card at the start of the year, then you're lying. I am a little bit worried about UCLA if I'm an Indiana fan. At the start of the year, I would not have been worried. But now I am, because UCLA is hot. And you could argue, and you would be right, their competition has been far from world beaters. Penn State sucks. Michigan State, coincidentally enough, UCLA beat Michigan State by the exact same score that Indiana did, 38-13. Michigan State is allowing nearly 40 points per game in Big Ten play. And UCLA beats Maryland on a last-second field goal at home at the Rose Bowl yesterday. Indiana's next 2 opponents are UCLA and Maryland in that order. I will be in College Park. I'll have the call for that Maryland game on the first day of November for WIUX Sports. It's my dad's birthday. IU playing games on both my parents' birthdays this year. Oregon and Maryland. Interesting. But I'm a little bit worried about UCLA because it seems like Nico Iamaleava has found himself a little bit. Nico, not eye-popping numbers yesterday. He did throw a couple interceptions against Maryland, but UCLA found a way to win, and at the end of the day, that's all that matters. So I will do more scouting on UCLA as the week rolls on. But I'm more concerned about UCLA than I am, I think, any other team remaining on Indiana's schedule. And I know you're thinking, oh, well, what about Penn State? No. Penn State lost to Iowa yesterday. Penn State has to play number 1 Ohio State before they host Indiana. Penn State has to go to the Horseshoe and play the Buckeyes. You talk about a downtrodden team. That's what Indiana's going to face when they go to Happy Valley. But as far as the remainder of Indiana's schedule, UCLA, I think, is the scariest to me. Big noon kickoff will be here. Noon kick on Fox in Bloomington. Indiana avoided the trap game against Michigan State. Part of me wonders if the slow start had to do with just the fact that you're coming off an emotional win and you see teams lay eggs all the time after picking up these big wins on the road, coming back home and just kind of falling flat. Indiana did not do that in the grand scheme of things, and I think the Miami loss to Louisville is a wake-up call, not just for Indiana, but for any team with a cute little number next to its name. That, yeah, any team can beat you. And the more successful you are, the bigger that target gets on your back. But Indiana's remaining schedule, UCLA, Maryland, Penn State, Wisconsin, Purdue. UCLA and Wisconsin, the only 2 home games. I feel like UCLA is the biggest threat to Indiana's undefeated season. Because you've got a hotshot young play caller, Jerry Neuheisel, son of Rick Neuheisel, former UCLA quarterback, and everybody's really high on him. I feel like now that they've put 3 games on tape with the new system, I feel like Indiana can figure them out. But part of me is just wondering, UCLA's red hot. Complacency is not something that Curt Cignetti's teams suffer from. But I'm just thinking about this, and all of a sudden, it's become a very interesting matchup to me. Now, I could be totally wrong, and Indiana could beat them 52-6, and it would be fine. But there were even some moments early in the Michigan State game where I was thinking, okay, we might have something here. And it ended up being that yesterday's game played out very similar to last year's game in East Lansing. Michigan State scores 10 early points, and then Indiana runs away with it. Maybe that's just how Indiana and Michigan State play each other with these current coaches, although I don't know how much longer Jonathan Smith is going to be at the helm in East Lansing. But Indiana 7-0, hosting UCLA next weekend. The chance to go 8-0. It's incredible thinking about this in the big picture. Curt Cignetti going to retire in Indiana. After yesterday, he's led the Hoosiers to back-to-back 7-0 starts. That is the first time that has ever happened in IU football history. And again, it seems like with every win, Cignetti breaks more and more records at Indiana, which speaks to, one, his ability as a coach, two, the players that he's brought in, and three, just how much of a doormat this team was for its entire existence before Cignetti came in. And I think Pam Whitten and Scott Dolson did the right thing by locking him up, because there were some rumors that, oh, he's going to Penn State, he's from Pennsylvania, yada, yada, yada. No. I'm glad that they jumped on that and stopped it before there was any real truth to the possibility of him going to Penn State. Because, as Cignetti said back in November of last year, I'm going to put on my best Yinzer accent for this. We're the emerging superpower in college football. Why would I leave? And it's a great question. I think some of Penn State's former recruits are really going to enjoy Bloomington, because Cignetti's building something here. And I would argue, say Indiana goes on a run. Let's just say the computers are right. Indiana makes the national championship game. I don't care what Cignetti does for the rest of his tenure. Build the statue. I think they should be building a statue right now. That's how good of a coach this guy is. 18-2 at Indiana, with the 2 losses coming to the national champion and the national championship runner-up. He's doing to bad teams what great coaches should do against bad teams, and beating the you-know-what out of them. Now, it's hard to win 12 straight college football games, but Indiana has a chance. There's 5 games left. Anything can happen. But Indiana has a chance to go undefeated in football and make the Big Ten title game. I can't believe it. But Cignetti, probably not surprised, because in his eyes, remember, no self-imposed limitations. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Welcome back to IU Sports Sunday. Nick Rotocap with you. And I know I was not here last week. That's because I was in Eugene, Oregon, and the travel arrangements were such that I could not get from the Pacific Northwest back to the great old Midwest in less than 24 hours. So I want to take a second and talk about my experience in Oregon. I called Indiana at Oregon for WIUX Student Radio. I was on the roof above the press box at Autzen Stadium. First of all, incredible backdrop. That venue is situated in a beautiful part of the country. I don't think I've ever called a football game with mountains overlooking the stadium before. I have called baseball games with mountains overlooking the stadium because I was in the Appalachian League this summer with the Greenville Flyboys, and some of the stadiums that we visited happened to have mountains overlooking. Elizabethton, Tennessee, Pulaski, Virginia, and off the top of my head, there's one more that I'm missing. Johnson City, Tennessee, and there's another one that I'm missing, but that's irrelevant. I had called baseball games with mountains overlooking the stadium before, but I had not done a football game, and that was awesome. The view was great. The atmosphere was amazing. Autzen Stadium, for its size, is ridiculously loud, although I think Ohio State is still much louder. I had friends who were on the field at both games, and they said at Ohio State you could feel the noise in your chest consistently. And at Oregon, the only time they could feel the noise in their chest was when Brandon Finney picked off Fernando Mendoza and took it back to the house to tie the game at 20. And on that note, another reason I believe Fernando Mendoza should be a Heisman finalist is because of the way he responds to adversity. The way he handles the low part of a big game in college football. Because he's done it twice now. He's made a puzzling decision, thrown an interception late in the game, and then come back onto the field afterwards like nothing happened. The one in Oregon was particularly impressive because he throws a pick six, ties the game at 20, and then he comes right back out and he leads a go-ahead touchdown drive. That is so difficult mentally. You've got to have such a short-term memory, especially doing that on the road in a hostile environment. But Mendoza did it like it was nothing, and I was so impressed by that at Oregon. Because I was thinking to myself, okay, Indiana's hung in this game. They've got the lead, and I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop. Because In every other road environment, they've been shaky, and it just hasn't been a complete showing. And I'm thinking, here's the pick six. Now if Oregon's defense gets a stop, this is where Oregon can take the lead. And it just didn't happen because Mendoza is so poised. And Curt Cignetti said after the Oregon game that he asked Mendoza after that pick six, are you having fun? Mendoza said, yeah, I'm having fun. And then he went out and he did his thing. That is what good leaders do. Cignetti and Mendoza alike. But Mendoza, he's just so laser focused. It doesn't seem like anything rattles him. It really doesn't. And the offensive line has gotten a lot better than last year, especially in those big environments as well. But Mendoza is just so poised. And when he has time to throw, I mean, you saw it yesterday against Michigan State. We talked about it earlier. This guy looks like the best college quarterback in the country. And it's not that he has open receivers. It's that he throws them open. It's that they don't have to break stride. It's that his timing and rhythm are nearly perfect now. And you think back to week 1, a little less than 2 months ago. What was the one thing that Cignetti stressed that Mendoza still needed to work on and that he said he was going to work on? Did Mendoza? His timing and his rhythm with his receivers. Well, you're seeing the fruits of that labor now. Curt Cignetti said he has never seen anyone prepare like Fernando Mendoza. This is a guy who's been coaching for, 40 years? So getting that level of praise from Cignetti tells you how much of a workaholic Fernando Mendoza is, and it is showing in spades. Still 5 regular season games left, but I'm telling you, Fernando Mendoza is going to be a Heisman Trophy finalist. He can win it if he keeps playing like he's been playing. He could win it. But getting back to my experience at Oregon, I called the second half of that game. That is one of the best experiences I've ever had calling anything ever. And I had another really cool experience that I'll get to in a little bit. But getting to broadcast from Autzen Stadium and ending up calling the biggest win in IU football history, that is something that I will never take for granted. That is something I will never forget. It's only the second football game I've ever done. The other one was Charlotte here in Bloomington last year. Yeah, pretty interesting dichotomy there. But it was incredible. Oregon fans, great people. There were a lot of IU fans out there as well. They traveled really well. We were at the Oregon team store on Sunday morning, and I got to go Hoosiers. In Eugene, Oregon, who would have thought? Oregon fans are great. They got a great atmosphere at Autzen. And that's what makes it even more impressive that Indiana was able to come out of there with a win. Everybody knows Autzen is a really tough place to play. Oregon hadn't lost there in 3 years, so naturally, Indiana is the one that snaps Oregon's home winning streak. And also, one of the longest active regular season winning streaks in Oregon as well. Snapped. Incredible stuff. Incredible experience. And, timing is everything, right? Because I'm a senior, that's why I got to experience this. If I was a junior, if I was a sophomore, I wouldn't get to. But my freshman and sophomore year, I had no interest in going to IU football games. I would go for the first half of some games, and then I would leave. I'll be straight up. There were games that I left early because it just was not an engaging product. It was not exciting, and there were better ways for me to spend my Saturday, like watching other college football games or bowling. I did a lot of that because I was on the club bowling team. But man, now you can't get into Memorial Stadium, and that's why Curt Cignetti is here for life. Got some IU basketball to talk about as well. I was on the call for Indiana Marion, the exhibition, on Friday night on Big Ten Plus. That was another one of the coolest experiences I've had calling a game. Doing an Indiana men's basketball game courtside. That was fun. And the score, I don't even remember the score. It was like 100-45 or something. The score is not what I'm focused on. Marion is an NAIA school. That's what should happen. What I am focused on is how Indiana played conceptually in that game. They shot a lot of threes. In the first half, Indiana was 12 of 20 from 3. Indiana, in its previous 3 home exhibitions combined, 5 for 19 in the first half. Indiana finished the game 15 for 30 from 3. 3 for 10 in the second half. But what was most impressive to me was, one, Tucker DeVries and Trent Sisley, both of whom had 23 points. And also, Indiana's intensity on defense. Darren DeVries has talked about it, how in his Indiana basketball, they're going to play with max effort at all times. They're going to pride themselves on their intensity, especially on defense. And it shows. It shows. I know with the caliber of opponent, you have to take things with a grain of salt. And I think we'll understand this team a little bit better when they play Baylor a week from today at Gainbridge Fieldhouse. That is also an exhibition. But I was impressed just sitting courtside, looking at the way everybody kept the intensity no matter the score. And that's not always a given. It's an exhibition. You know you're going to win. It's a question of how hard are you going to work. And it looks like DeVries has his team right now playing with a level of intensity on defense that I think is going to take them far. And he talked about in pregame media, talked about learning things from the football program. And one of the key points that DeVries made as the newly introduced first-year head coach of Indiana basketball is that football, they play disciplined, they're smart, and they're unselfish. They understand that the team goals supersede individual goals. And DeVries said, if we can do those sorts of things, we're going to give ourselves a pretty good chance to win on any given night. I'm thinking, wow, what world do we live in? What is this timeline where the football coach at Indiana is teaching things to the basketball program? Because usually it'd be the other way around. But it just goes to show that obviously football and basketball, completely different sports. But there are things that translate across every sport. Discipline, unselfishness, keeping the team above the individual. Those are the kinds of things that are going to translate for Indiana basketball. And those are kinds of things that we didn't see in the recent past with Indiana basketball. There wasn't a lot of discipline. You think back to incidents like C.J. Gunn getting ejected in Wisconsin a couple years ago. You think about Xavier Johnson having some extracurriculars on and off the floor during his time in Bloomington. You think about the unselfishness. There were a lot of selfish players on the team last year, I'm going to tell you straight up. A lot of guys playing for a check. I don't think that that's going to be as much of a problem this year, and it all starts with a man at the top, Darren DeVries. A lot to like just from that exhibition about Indiana men's basketball this year. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotacap with you. I like the ESPN FPI for some things, but I talked about it earlier. I'm just kind of confused. It should account for head-to-head. There is no world where Oregon should be second in the ESPN FPI, and Indiana should be fourth right now because Indiana beat Oregon in Eugene. I don't know. If Indiana, you just keep winning, the rest will take care of itself. Speaking of the rest taking care of itself, Heisman-Doza chants at Memorial Stadium yesterday from the student section saying, hey, Fernando Mendoza, you're going to be a Heisman winner. And he talked about it and said, I'm grateful for the fans. He shouted out the shirtless guys up in Section 19 waving towels around. Man, remember when that started in 2021 and it was because Indiana was so bad that everybody got bored? Now they're doing it because Indiana's so good and it rained and they figured, what the heck, why not? Sorry, Oklahoma State, we did it first. Mendoza said, I'm thankful for that, thankful for the fans, huge shout out to the fans, but I'm focused on UCLA. Laser focused, fantastic, that's his favorite word, Fernando Mendoza. There were some, I think they were Louisville TV sports reporters in Bloomington, and they were shooting the Fernando Mendoza postgame interview, and they're like, this guy is a character. They're acting surprised when he says all these things, and I'm thinking, have you guys not been covering this team the entire year? Because he does this every week. Very methodical, very deliberate in his answers. The guy's like a walking thesaurus. I mean, he has a business degree from Cal, and he's going to have a degree from Kelly as well. So I'm not surprised. But Mendoza, laser focused. The Wall Street Journal did a feature story on him. That's the kind of guy this is. That's the kind of guy that he is off the field. On the field, though, he is a freaking killer. He is so good. And you saw it yesterday. I know Michigan State's defense isn't good, but Mendoza is putting together a really impressive body of work, and I'm telling you, this guy is going to be in New York when all is said and done. And who knows, while he's out there for the Heisman Trophy ceremony, he might also go to Wall Street and do some networking and meet some people who are pretty high up in the finance world, just because that's the kind of person he is. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Back on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotacap with you. Short show today. Short show because we've got NFL in London, so I've only got a little bit more time, which kind of stinks because we weren't here last week. Like I said, I was in Eugene, Oregon, and I think I've only just now mentally recovered from that trip. It was a tax. But Jags-Rams in London coming up at 9:30. We'll switch over there at 9:15 here on WGCL. Have the Westwood One call of that game. But I'll tell you what, the more I think about this UCLA game, the more I think this might be the one that decides, and it sounds elementary, but the more I think about it, the more I think, yeah, this could be the one that decides whether or not Indiana goes undefeated. I know you're thinking, well, wouldn't that be the bucket game? Because that's the final game of the season. Yes. But I just feel like UCLA, I never would have said this last year because Indiana went into the Rose Bowl and dominated. But UCLA just keeps finding ways to win after firing Deshaun Foster. And they're red hot. Now they've got to come to Bloomington. But I will say, it seemed like the crowd yesterday was not as rowdy as it was for Illinois, which I guess shouldn't be surprising because Illinois was a much higher profile opponent and the game took place in primetime, and there was no threat of severe thunderstorms. So maybe I'm making something out of nothing here. But it feels like this was one of the weaker crowds Indiana has had at home in a Big Ten game under Curt Cignetti. And I feel like the fans are going to need to play more of a factor next week. It felt like everything was kind of, I'm not going to say muted, but especially with that slow start defensively for Indiana. I mean, Michigan State converts that first third and long, and then they're off and running. It feels like with the slow start that Indiana had defensively, that the crowd was not as energetic as it could have been. Maybe my perception of energy has been spoiled by going to Autzen Stadium and seeing what they do over there in Eugene. But I just feel like it left some more to be desired. Aiden Childs was using a silent count, which I don't think I've ever seen at Memorial Stadium. So again, maybe I'm making something out of nothing. But I feel like the crowd is going to need to be more of a factor against UCLA than it was against Michigan State. That is just my 2 cents on the topic. I'm happy to be proven wrong. I'm happy for Indiana to completely blow my expectations out of the water and just throttle UCLA. I'd be happy to see that. UCLA this season, 3-4 overall, winners of 3 in a row, 3-1 in the Big Ten. The 3 teams that they've beaten, as we know, Penn State, Michigan State, and Maryland. So Penn State looked like a crazy good win at the time. Now we're realizing that Penn State is just nowhere near as good as people thought they would be this year. UCLA beat Michigan State in East Lansing by the exact same score that Indiana beat Michigan State here in Bloomington. But there were very few Michigan State fans in attendance by the end of that game because it was so lopsided. And then UCLA beats Maryland at the Rose Bowl yesterday. But as we know, Big Ten teams sometimes struggle going from east to west, although Indiana had no problem with that last year or this year. UCLA's losses, this is under Deshaun Foster, so take everything with a pinch of salt because things have changed. Blowout loss to Utah, close loss to UNLV, blowout loss to New Mexico, and then a loss to Northwestern in Evanston. By the way, Northwestern shut out Purdue yesterday. I think it was 19-0 was the final score of that game. My Purdue friend, who's in the All-American Marching Band, he said, yeah, I'm ready to move on to basketball season. 19-0 Northwestern over Purdue as the Boilers continue to labor, and that's putting it lightly. Other notable scores around the Big Ten, we figured that Penn State might struggle at Kinnick, and this is when James Franklin was still employed. Well, Iowa beat him 25-24. Hawkeyes 5-2 on the season. Michigan handled Washington, probably the best win that Michigan has this season. People were pushing for Washington to be ranked. I was thinking, why aren't the Huskies ranked? Well, now we know. Indiana, I was thinking earlier in the year that Indiana is fortunate not to play Washington this year, but now I'm not so sure. Oregon throttled Rutgers 56-10. Ohio State shut out Wisconsin 34-0. I feel like that's what Indiana needs to do to Wisconsin when the Badgers come to Bloomington here in about a month, is just throttle them. Luke Fickell, I don't know how he's still employed, to be honest with you. And there's a local connection there. Danny O'Neill, former Cathedral High School quarterback, transferred to Wisconsin, and man, he went from one bad situation to another, and I feel for him. I feel for him because Wisconsin football is a shell of what it used to be, and that's putting it politely. USC Notre Dame. Notre Dame beat the Trojans by 10 yesterday because Jeremiah Love is the best running back in college football. And Indiana fans remember that all too well. But Jeremiah Love against the USC defense yesterday ran wild. 228 rushing yards and a touchdown. He averaged 9.5 yards per carry. That is absurd. And I think that's being polite. Absurd in the best way for Jeremiah Love. I'll tell you what, there is a world where perhaps, and I don't know how likely this is, but it's technically possible, that Indiana and Notre Dame have a rematch in the CFP, but it would be in Bloomington if things go the way I think they're going to go. I don't know how I feel about that, because Jeremiah Love is still clearly really, really, really good. I think the more likely outcome, though, is that Indiana makes the Big Ten championship, and regardless, win or lose, Indiana gets a bye in the CFP. There was an Oregon fan on Twitter saying, I've never been more convinced that Oregon intentionally lost last week to avoid the bye in the CFP, to avoid making the conference title game. That's an interesting level of cope. I don't think that Dan Lanning wanted Dante Moore to get killed all game in the backfield. But I am kind of concerned because all the teams that got the bye in the college football playoff struggled because you go so long without playing. And sometimes, when you're really hot, you just want to stay the course. You want to stay in rhythm, and a couple weeks off kind of takes you out of that. Think about Oregon last year. Beat Ohio State at Autzen by 1 point, yes, but beat Ohio State at Autzen and then got a rematch in the Rose Bowl and couldn't compete. Ohio State was coming off that huge first-round win over Tennessee at home. And I'm just thinking, is there an avenue where Indiana loses the Big Ten championship and then gets the number 5 seed? Because it almost seems like the number 5 seed is where you'd rather be. I don't know. I think that would be my... If I could pick, if I'm Indiana and I could pick, I would say, give me the 5 seed. Let me host a playoff game. And I know you're playing an additional game, and it's the wear and tear of football, and there are positives to getting the bye and there are positives to not getting the bye, just like there are negatives both ways. But I would be slightly concerned. Although, again, that's a 1-year sample that the teams with the bye struggled last year. I can't believe that I'm talking about Indiana getting a bye in the college football playoff. I never would have thought that I'd be here talking about this right now. Think about it. A couple years ago, the measure of success for this program was getting to 6 wins and making a bowl game. Now we're like, we don't need bowl games. Last bowl win, 1991, who cares? College football playoff, way more important. And I'm on board with that. But it just goes to show the way Curt Cignetti has done what he said he was going to do. He said, I'm going to change the way people think about Indiana football. I'm going to change the way people think about Indiana football. And he did it. And you remember how brash he was, talking up a big storm, and sometimes it coming back to bite him last year? Well, he said he had to do that because he had to wake the fan base up. Indiana 7-0, going to be the number 2 team in the country. Now he's more measured because I think people have woken up. UCLA comes into town next weekend. We'll be right back here on WGCL, but now it's time to get you out to London as the Jags are getting set to take on the Los Angeles Rams. And as a Colts fan, I say, Los Angeles, please pretty please take care of business. Hopefully that practice at Camden Yards did you some good. You've been listening to IU Sports Sunday.